So, the first thing I wanted to say, when I woke up this morning and I put on my telephone, I saw a notification from Twitter. And I will tell you, I was really excited to see that it was from Kurt Goggle and not Donald Trump. So it was really exciting that, people are beginning to talk about XSLT 3.0 and get that in the mainstream. So let's keep it going. Now, I entitled this A Journey Through the Ages. I don't want to bore people to death about the total history of this, but I want people to understand, that this was quite a process. We didn't just start and get through it because we had lots of pressures on us. We had lots of people interested in it, lots of different views about what we should be doing, what kind of language we were creating, and so on and so forth. So there were many twists and turns and many, many surprises as we went along the way. And these are some of the things that I hope to share with you. So, one of the things that is important to me, I don't like to make people save their questions to the end because sometimes it loses the context. So I'm totally comfortable if you have a question as I say something, and usually people do, I'm never very clear, just raise your hands and I will try to answer it in line. And because I'm old and hard of hearing, I asked Charles to repeat the question because I can't always hear everybody in this audience. So I would appreciate speaking up. But anyway, so the other thing that was exciting to me is that I worked at IBM a lot of years, and I worked there for a while in electronic publishing, and I went back to IBM after a stint in other places and was a senior manager in IBM Research. And after XML was around for 10 years, the director of research called me into his office and he said, I want to celebrate XML. And I said, you do? You're an IBM vice president. What do you mean you want to celebrate XML? And he said to me, XML is a universally explicable code of integration. And I said, okay, what does that mean? But to him, it was really very important that he thought XML could be used to bring together all the world's information in various different formats. And I thought that was marvelous. I still do. He left IBM and went to lead a group at Google, which he also retired from. But I still think it's kind of neat that they're high-level, non-technical business executives that can think that way about XML, and we need to continue it and keep it going. So that is one of the premises. But my talk is basically, how did we get here? Okay? So I started all of this, and I think of formulating a conceptual base is through SGML. And I know Debbie is a former SGML person that I hired into Boeing Computer Services a long time ago. So, but
I was one of the little kids when she was one of the big kids when she hired me.
that's right. And I'm even bigger, no. But anyway, but the point was that my background was typesetting and electronic publishing. That's what I cared about, and that's how all of this fit together, not only for me, but the other 5 people that were on the SGML committee. We were publishers. That's what we thought about. And when people ask things about the programmability of XSL and about the programming language, we weren't programmers. We weren't, and some people say, yes, you can tell. I'm not talking about XSL, I'm talking about HTML. But anyway, so but this is where some of the concepts come from, you know. Keep formatting, typesetting, style information, whatever is the word you want to use, separate from the content, from the data. And, but for me, the more important thing was getting multiple vendors to, you know, be able to work with me in my application. I was director of publications at Duke University, which is known maybe in the world more for basketball than, you know, other things, but nevertheless, I wanted to be able to get all sorts of vendors, and we were responsible for the course catalogs, the registrar, and all of the information coming from a central database, but they rekeyed it for everything. And granted, you can tell this a long time ago, but nevertheless, in many places, that's still, you know, the case. And so for me, we wanted to make our own language and be able to use it with anybody out there who wanted to make money. So this led me into SGML, and I had no idea at the time I was going to spend half of my life doing it, and it literally is half of my life. I joined the SGML committee started in 1979. The first thing that I did was speak at a graphic communications conference in 1978, and the rest is history. But the first real SGML conference was in Oxford, England, and so for me, some of this is like coming home. Anyway, so I talked about reuse. I don't have to go into that. And people have asked questions about why in the hell do we have all of these things in XML? Well, it was deemed that these were the things that were continued to be useful. If anybody has any questions on them, ask, but this audience seems lots more sophisticated about that than I anticipated. So again, I probably should have given my caveats that you know, everyone else seemed to do. This is my personal opinion, and not that I'm going to evangelize, because I'm not, but I retired 10 years ago, so I have nothing to evangelize. We'll leave evangelization of XSLT up to you all and Michael and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, a lot of the difficulties that we had with markup is because the tools were so bad. And everybody has a different idea of what is good or what is bad. And yesterday, I mentioned to the fellow from XEditor that what he was showing was something that I was looking for the last 40 years. And I'm not exaggerating. It is something that I've been looking for the last 40 years, because I'm one of the only SGML persons who believes in WYSIWYG, because my customers wanted WYSIWYG. And somebody said, well, what does that really mean? And they're right. WYSIWYG is a lousy term. But the point is, and I think I said it yesterday, is people are looking for some feedback that what they entered is correct. And that feedback is easiest when it's formatting feedback. You know, I know that's a headline. It's big type. You know, if I made a mistake and it doesn't come out big type, then I know I have to look at what I did. So, but there's all sorts of caveats, because you get into trouble with, you know, well, what does the white space there represent? Is it the formatted output? And which view is it? And all of these things, but they can all be handled. All you have to do is want to. And unfortunately, lots of people didn't want to because it was too hard. Okay, and so they just kept trying to make people do it their way. And people rebelled. And so, and we still have that going on today. Thank goodness applications are more sophisticated than just little word processing documents that we had to deal with back 40 years ago. And so people understand that there's many bang for the bucks with applying tags and having more sophisticated systems. So, but the tools were really bad, and all you could do was parse. And frankly, I think parsing is boring. I'm sorry, but you gotta be able to do something with the data. You needed to do more than just parse. And so then some browsers came along. I don't know how many of you are familiar with SoftQuad's Panorama. It's from a while ago, or EBT's Dynatext. Andrews and I worked at EBT. It was one of the first things, and I said, well, I'm really happy to be able to use the SGML that's out there. So that began to really change things, and people got, more interested in it. And so, yes.
You're talking about browsers in the 89
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Abel, you have to.
You're talking about browsers in the...
These were SGML browsers, Abel,
HTML browsers.
not today's browsers. This is way ahead of Netscape and Gopher and all of those things.
Yeah, that was my
okay?
question.
So, got it. Excuse me?
My dad said he wasn't
Yes,
born.
you were not bored. I keep telling you that, Abel. You make comments and I go, Abel, I was doing that before you were even a gleam in your mother's eye. So, anyway. It's one of the great things about being an old battle axe. You're very free and liberated from, trying to be something you're not. So,
Peter Flynn has a copy of Panorama up and running.
excuse me?
Peter Flynn has a copy of Panorama.
I'm sure. Well, I used to have a copy of Dynatext. I was not a Panorama user. I was a Dynatext user. And it's interesting because all of these things, all these companies, everybody fought with everybody, and well, my way is the right way. No, my way is the right way. And, we still have that. And, but it created a lot of the background for this stuff because everybody thinks that there's a one way is the solution to this. And it causes us to end up, somebody last night said, we're too provincial, we end up just talking to ourselves. And I think that's one of the issues in the XML world that I'd like to see be different. So, but it has a long history, and that's, basically what I'm here to say, but we can change that history. So just think about it that way. Anyway, so HTML was derived from SGML, from the CERN SGML User's Guide. And my husband in the audience is the author of the SGML CERN User's Guide. And Tim Berners-Lee does give him credit for that. And so it is, when people turn up their nose at HTML because they don't like it and so on, it has that underpinning. And so, but that was the impetus. It was SGML, but it wasn't used that way or thought of that way because people just wanted to make tags. And so John Bosack wanted to bring SGML to the web. That was his impetus. He was on the DISL committee with me, Anders, and James Clark, and a bunch of other people. And so he drove the early initiative with the web people for XML on the web. And so XML was the syntax, and Xlink was for sophisticated linking, and XSL was for style, the replacement of DISL. So the focus of XSL at the beginning was style information. Now, a lot of people didn't think we could do it. They thought you can't have an interchangeable, I can't think of the right words, but an interchangeable language to a formatter. You can only standardize a formatting language. But we didn't want to do that because number one, we wanted the language to be able to be implemented on existing languages. We didn't want people to have to throw out what they had and start from scratch. We wanted them to be able to, write transformations and so on and so forth. And DISL had two parts. It had transformation piece, and then it had the formatting semantics piece. And we were doing the same thing with XSL. Okay. I think I already talked about that. But the original goal, I still love this. The original goal of all of this was to make it simple. And James Clark used to say to me, we have to do it in 8 pages. We can't have this, we can't have that. It has to be simple, 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 simple. So they got XML to fit in the small number of pages. But you imagine what they would think of XSLT and XQuery and XProc and all of this stuff. I mean, what is it, Michael? How many pages did you quote yesterday? Lots. Lots and lots and lots. So it just makes me laugh because, you see, set your goals, but they're going to change. Anyway, so that's X ... in computing. Jim Melton, who was the chairman for many years of the XQuery committee, saying that XML is the part of the DNA of computing. I never thought I'd live to hear that kind of thing coming from a database person. And of course, you've all heard about the document and data wars, but let me tell you, that's a small number of wars. We had more wars than you could ever imagine. I'm going to give you the list of all the wars in a minute, but one of the issues was, and still is are you doing narrative text or is it flat data-like structures? And the beauty of XML is it works perfectly for both. And it even works better to combine both. And that was my goal. That's what I cared about. Because I was responsible for documents, but we had to pull in the data from disparate sources. And by the way, I always worked with customers. Well, the last 10 years I've been retired. And the 10 years before that, I was a senior manager at IBM Research. So I didn't do customers. My teams were out with the customers. So I have to apologize to you because some of these examples that I used to live with for years and years and years are not exactly on the tip of my tongue anymore. I really feel out of it. In fact, I said to Charles, I said, I haven't been to a customer in so long, I don't really know what's going on out in the world. And so at the end, one of the things I'm going to ask from people is, what are you hearing out there? What are the customers saying to you? Is this important? Is that important? What do they want? So, but I'm jumping ahead as I usually do. But the thing that I'm most proud about in what we did in XSLT land is that we could have all squabbled. We could have had a real fight on our hands between XPath, XQuery, and XSLT, and we didn't. And contrary to what you may have read out on the web, we worked really hard to make it happen, but we worked together to make it happen. And it wasn't that XQuery made XSLT change or XSLT people made XQuery change. Yeah, we fought over lots of things that, operators and what's equal and reserve names and God knows what. But the idea was we always knew we had to make it work for both languages and both communities. And I think we did that. Does anybody think we didn't do it? Now I had to ask because, I've had people in the past when I used to be out there and go to conferences and talk to people who say, well, I really don't like that you did all of this to work with XQuery. And then I go, would you rather have two competing languages? You know? And they go, oh, no, they should do it you know. So I said, the database world is slightly bigger than the XML world, so let's be happy we're coming together, okay? So, but the idea is that we did share and become a family of standards. As Michael has said, and I stole this from you, Michael, we lost some focus, but I think we became more inclusive and have much better market appeal. So the focus for me now is how to stay relevant for the next 30 years. In SGML land, we always used to talk about how the data had to live for decades. When I was trying to think about this presentation, those decades are over. You know, we've lived for the decades, we've lived for 40 years. Are we going to live for another 60 years? Our data, what does it have to look like? What are some of the issues? So the idea is we want to continue to be relevant. We all know that we want to separate formatting from the other information. This is just my way of admitting to people, because people kept saying, why is it still called the XSL working group when it's XSLT? And I just wanted to admit to everybody that it's my fault. And it's my fault because I didn't want to change the name. Oh, when we stopped working on XSL formatting objects, I didn't want to create waves. I'm sorry for the people that got confused why the whole working group was called XSL when primarily we were just working on XSLT. It even confuses the people on the committee. I don't even know what to call the agendas, or didn't know what to call the agendas. But for those of you who were confused by it, my apologies. I was trying to keep it quite simple and easy. So, but as I said, we had lots of conflict. We have lots of questions about, you know, what kind of language were we going to build? Was it a procedural language? Was it an imperative language? Was it a object-oriented language? Was it a functional language? Et cetera, et cetera. What type system? Back in the DISL days, one of the guys used to say, well, you have to have a dynamically typed system. No, you need a statically typed system, and so on and so forth. And these things continue to come up over the years. But it's not that we didn't think about it. It's at different times in the 40 years we thought about it, but we thought about it. So, and this is a list of what I could remember when I created the list of some of the things that we constantly faced with all of this, because some of the people didn't know anything about publishing and they didn't care. So they didn't care that we did these things for large-scale publishing applications. They were more interested in data, you know, what the bank was doing, what the pharmacy was doing, and so on and so forth. And they didn't see the need at the time of bringing those worlds together. And then there were those who said, well, no, you're talking about, you know, paper, or you're talking about something that doesn't exist on the web. And it was one of the things that scared me as chair of the XSL committee, because at the time that we were into this, there wasn't a lot of web applications for it out there. And what was there was HTML and CSS, and everybody was pretty happy with it. So it was like, uh-oh, you can't be a W3C committee if you're not interested in web applications. So we had to sort of learn as we went along. And that's, you know, again, a bit in the early days. And so there was also issues of, you know, consumer-oriented folks as opposed to high-end enterprise businesses and things, and that created a lot of diversity. And I have to say, I can't just save enough about the difficulties of the different personalities and the different drivers of the companies that those personalities worked for. Because many times people said, it's got to be this way. My company says it's got to be this way. As an example, with XSL, we didn't start with the idea that we were going to transform it to HTML. But Jonathan Marsh from Microsoft said, well, we're not going to do anything that's going to get in the way of our Office products. And so we're not going to be dealing with this stuff for documents. We need to make it work for data. And so he was insistent at the time that we have a for each so we could iterate over data easily rather than just have applied templates. So that was one of the first meetings we ever had. So these are some of the pressures that we had as we went along. How many of you know that there was some interesting challenges between the Xlink people, and we had to bring together XPath and XPointer and turn that, well, it wasn't XPath at the time. I can't remember, Andrews. Do you remember what it was called? Because I brought together Steve DeRose, who used to work at EBT with me, and James Clark, who was a good friend, and made them sit in a room, and we got XPath out of it. And that's the first time we published the XPath document. But what was the XSLT path language before it was called XPath? I'm sorry, never mind.
I ought to know.
Yeah, well, I ought to know too, but I don't. It was in the XSLT spec.
XML-based language.
No, it was, no, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
It was never an XML-based language.
No, it got split out so that James and Steve DeRose.
No, we pulled it out, but it was navigation, something. Sorry, I haven't thought about it in so many years, but yes, it was not XPath. It became XPath when we brought those two things together. And, a lot of the people said, oh, you don't need XSLT, we have the DOM. And so that was interesting. And the reason why these things are up here is because you need to know that all of these groups wanted to kill XSLT at one point or another. And so we were constantly having to look over our shoulders to make sure that we were able to keep going. So it's quite a challenge to do this when people think that you're getting in their way. So anyway, I just thought it would be fun. But the important thing that I actually want to bring up is the STX. Everybody knows about JSON. I don't know how many, well, Michael, you talk about STX with streaming.
Well, here goes the expert on STX.
Excuse me?
Here goes here.
No, it's not Yurka.
I thought you were involved in it.
No, he just brought, he just provided a room. No, I mean, but no, actually, I want to say, yeah. Debbie, everything falls out of my mouth. No, actually, we owe streaming to Yurka because he provided the room, but he also provided the place where people with different ideas about streaming could come together and have an impact on us. And I think that we built a decent language because of the meetings we had in Prague and where people could come and talk about the philosophy of streaming. In addition, the STX people joined the XSLT group because of it, but the only meetings they ever came to were in Prague. So, so thank you, Yurka. I really appreciate it. Okay, and of course everybody knows what we have with JSON in and out. And so I already did that. So this is where I want to end. And now I want to ask you guys. People were talking, when I started looking on the web, about the explosive nature of XML vocabularies. Is that still true?
No,
I didn't think so.
no,
No. Do we want to make it true?
no.
Okay, so what do we want to do?
I don't mind everybody using XML vocabularies. I don't think everybody has to write XML vocabularies.
Okay, so you think that the few vocabularies we have out there should just be used?
Yeah, and keep adding to that few.
Okay.
Few?
In the bespoke days.
Excuse me?
Few, did you say?
In comparison, yes. I'm going to talk about that in about half an hour.
Okay, yes, I was going to
I'm
say.
going to talk about that.
Right, well, that's, yes, I know that.
Opinions, of course.
No, but that's what I'm interested in, because when, again, I've been retired for 10 years. I haven't looked at this stuff. In order to do this presentation, I decided to, to go out there and try to see what people were saying. And I thought, gee, I don't know whether any of this is true or not, because I haven't been there.
I
So,
think we had a phase of explosive growth in vocabularies, and what we've seen is a very valuable consolidation.
no, I knew that it was at one time, but the question is, what is happening now? So,
I'll
say,
talk about
no,
that in half an
that's good.
At one time, there were 8 vocabularies for doing music.
No, I know that, Michael, believe me, I do.
And 65 for doing journals.
Yes, I know. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask about, web services, that was a big deal at IBM, and it still is a big deal, but somebody mentioned it here yesterday. Does anybody still talk about web services?
We're still doing them, they're not talking about them anymore.
Okay, they're doing them, and yes, Abel.
Plumbing, it's plumbing.
Yeah, I mean, we use them every day, basically, web services.
Okay, so it's just talking about using them. No, it was
They're
a...
not so abstract.
It was a driver for XML inside IBM, so I was just wondering whether it was still a driver out for other companies, because it also helped push XSLT for some period of time.
Every wireless router uses web services.
No, I understand that. I do. I was just wondering if it's pushing more XML or more XSLT, or are we just settling into what's out there and using it? Because that's a very different thing.
I
So-
have something to share about.
Excuse me?
Sorry.
Soap probably drove Jason, because people hated it
Because people
so
hated
much.
soap.
Soap drove, yeah, you're right. Everybody hated soap.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's web services are still in use. However, I have an observation to report in that in U.S. healthcare there is a lot of web services also standardized, but they are not actually using XML really. So they are using SOAP and envelopes, but they cannot really deal with XML, but rather with templates of text that look like XML, but really aren't. So
Right, that's, but you see, I really think of that as somewhat of a tooling issue, but that's my bias, so.
The other thing with soap is that tens of thousands of companies use soap all the time for government organisations. Every time you pay your tax, every time you do anything online, it's now going through soap. And it is XML under the covers, but they don't use any other XML tools. It didn't lead
Right,
to running
yeah,
XSLT.
I don't want to spend
They don't
any
even
time
know
talking
XPath
about
into
soap.
it.
I didn't mean,
Also,
unless it's the kind you use to wash. you
Also,
know.
it's plumbed into .NET and Java, so they can deal with it in an object way. So it didn't teach them any more about XML, but it would prove
Right.
a useful tool.
Well, that's the problem with a lot of this stuff, because, they push it, and I think, aha, this makes, XML, but they don't use XML with it. So that's, again, we try to be so flexible, anything in, anything out. And so there goes the XML. But anyway, so the other thing that, for me, that impacted us is semantics, machine learning, RDF, and so on. When I spoke the last time at XML Prague, I talked about the RDF worlds and the XML worlds, coming together a bit. And I had hoped that that was going to happen But I cared about it from a semantic point of view, not just syntax. And one of the anecdotes that I have always talked in the past, when I started working on DISL for the ISO, Charles Goldfarb said to me, "Sharon, what are you doing a semantic standard for? Don't you know that those are hard?" He said, "Just do syntax." And I said, "Charles, don't you know if you just do syntax, you can't do anything with it?" So, I know it's hard, but, we have to rise to these challenges. So, but I always saw semantics in the XML markup. That's why, personally, and I've said this to Norm and da-da-da, I hate the vocabularies that are just structure, H1s and titles and stuff like that. I want good semantic, or what I used to call content markup. I've worked with the pharmaceutical companies, and so one of the applications that I did gazillions of years ago was working with pharmaceutical data and then being able to create byproducts of information. So Debbie mentioned the not stocking stuffers, the box stuffers. When you buy a pharmaceutical, there's something in there that you open it up and it has all of the information about the drug. Well, that comes from the same database as the drug information that has to go to the government for approval and so on and so forth. It's creating those byproducts of information. Well, everybody knows that it's easy to do that these days, but it wasn't easy to do that years ago, because all those different purposes of pieces of information was always rekeyed. And so it cost lots of money. But anyway, so what do? Should there be more XSLT work? Shall we let it die? What's going to happen now that we're finished with 3.0? Yes?
I don't know, but I would like to point out that in the SGML days, we used to tell the lie that put your stuff in SGML and you'll be able to do anything with it. And everybody said, right, if we have programmers and we know the following 12 languages. And XSLT made all those lies true. And you really can do anything with it.
No, I understand.
And I'm not expecting that to die soon.
Well, I hope you're right, but somebody yesterday mentioned, or today, that if things don't change, like we're talking about the FAQ, Dave Pawson's FAQ, if things don't change, the perception is that it's dying. And it's very easy because people have a very short attention span and they want something new. I'm almost finished. They want something new and exciting every couple of years. So from my perspective, what can be done to keep XSLT and XML and any other X that comes along exciting? Or do we just coast and let the stuff be used? I'm going to end there, and Abel? And I can never bypass asking.
Sorry, maybe we can put it out into community standards in some way, or if you want to keep it changing, then one way to keep things changing is to allow the larger community to comment or join discussions.
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the things that can be done. But you see, you need a home for that kind of work to be done.
Yes.
But it's possible, and that's one of the things that Charles and I were talking about at lunch, how to create a home and what would it look like to have a home for stuff like that. So I'm glad you brought that up because, the community process within the W3C is one mechanism, but it's not the only one. And so I will just leave it at that and hope that, in 5 years, you guys are still doing this. So thanks very much for your attention. And